What's going on, guys? In today's video I'm going to be showing you guys how to install a rapid fire mod chip inside of your PS5 Dualsense Controller. Now, in case if you're wondering why exactly would you want to install a rapid fire mod chip into your controller, well, the real question is, why not? Simply because you can actually do stuff like this with a pistol. Or who knows, maybe you want to do something like this with a semi-automatic assault rifle.
Bravo. Taking B.
EKIA.
Hostile sentry.
Now, as you can see, this rapid fire mod chip is pretty overpowered, especially with that semi-auto DMR assault rifle. As you can see there, you can pretty much go all out with any weapon that you can actually think of that will be able to utilize this mod. Now, other than rapid fire, this mod chip does other stuff, kind of like drop shot, jump shot, or you can actually even program your back buttons on the back of your PlayStation controller if you choose to install those as well. So the possibilities are pretty much endless for the amount of customization that you can do with this chip. So with a little bit of time and patience, I'm actually going to show you guys exactly how to install this chip. It's pretty simple and easy. Hopefully this is going to be the best guide that you guys can watch to be able to show you exactly how to install this chip into your DualSense controller. So in order to complete this mod, we essentially want to take out that main inner shell of your DualSense controller. Now, that inner shell that I'm talking about is just that one that your motherboard is simply attached to. So once you take out all those screws, it pretty much just falls right out for you. Now, as you can see here, we just simply have to flip over that main plastic shell to show the 4 screws that are on that faceplate. Now, these 4 screws, they're actually holding in the triggers that are on your DualSense controller. Now, the reason why we actually have to remove these triggers is because we have to hook up L2, R2, L1, and L2 directly to the mod chip. Now, the easiest and best way to do this is to just simply remove the triggers. Now, you can do it without removing the triggers, but I personally find this the easiest way possible. So once we actually remove these triggers, as you'll notice here, these are the 2 solder points that we have to solder our wires to. Now I'm actually going to put up a quick picture for you guys just so you can visualize it a little bit easier. So the main points that you want to worry about is just the red ones, as you can see here. So this top point right here, this is L2 and R2. This goes for the same for both triggers, and that bottom one, that is L1 and R1. So with that said, we can go ahead and remove the ribbon cables that are going to our triggers, just in case we don't want to melt anything. We're better off being on the safe side. So now we can go ahead and solder on some 30 gauge Kynar wire. Now this is just the wire that I'm currently using at the moment, and I'm going to solder 2 wires to each trigger directly to those points that you saw earlier on that picture. And one thing that you'll also notice is that I usually apply some liquid electrical tape. Now, this is just to be safe because that liquid electrical tape just provides a secondary barrier just in case if these connections ever come loose from all the vibrations in the controller, because all my controllers are essentially built to last. Now, once we have our 4 wires all soldered up, we can go ahead and install our triggers back. We just have to simply put in the 2 screws that are on each trigger. So we got 2 on the left and then 2 on the right. Once we screw those screws back in, we're pretty much all set and we can start installing our mod chip. Now, to install a mod chip, we actually simply have to lift up our DualSense motherboard. Now, to do that, there are usually just 2 tabs that are on each side of that motherboard. We just have to move them out of the way, and then the board will simply flip back over. Next, you want to go ahead and just remove the analog sticks just to make it a little bit easier for you guys. And as you can see, this is that rapid fire mod chip that I'm going to be installing. Now, the most important part is alignment with this. So as you can see here, we essentially want to align the 2 circles that are next to all the pads where all the main connections are to the front of the buttons of the DualSense controller, because this mod chip is pretty much intersecting all the signals that are coming from the inputs that you are putting into your controller, and then it's modifying it and then spitting it out in its own way to the motherboard, and then that sends it to your PlayStation 5, and that's how you get all your different modes like jump shot, rapid fire, and everything like that. So some main points that you want to make sure that are correct for the alignment is the LED that is located at the bottom. So this LED is what's going to indicate what modes that you're in, and this LED is actually going to be illuminating through your microphone button. So one thing that I like to do to help with the alignment is essentially just put in 2 tiny small drill bits into the 2 circles where your contact pads meet up. And once you do that, you're pretty much guaranteed that your mod chip isn't going to move on you when you're trying to solder your main power board in. And now this main power connection, it's the same exact connection that I utilize for all my LED mod controllers. So that's why you're actually seeing that blue wire that's sticking out the top. That's because I'm also installing LEDs inside of this controller as well for a customer. So you guys can just essentially disregard that if you're not doing any LEDs at all. And then once we hook up our main power connection, we can actually go ahead and apply small amount of hot glue at the corners of the mod chip. This is just to be sure that the mod chip isn't going to move around and slide around when you go to install it back into that main plastic shell. So I just put a little bit above the left analog stick, as you can see here, and then at the bottom right of that right analog stick. Once we do that, we can actually flip that motherboard back over and essentially push it back into that main shell. And then those 2 tabs are going to hold back in that motherboard for you. Now that that's out of the way, we can actually fold these 2 tabs over. And if your alignment was correct, you'll notice that these 2 tabs are going to essentially fall right into place to their main soldering connections. Now these main soldering connections are the areas for L3 and R3. So in a little bit, I'm actually going to put up some pictures to help you guys visualize exactly where to put your soldering points to. So again, so here is that main point, that main power point where you want to solder your mod chip directly to. So this is that 3.2 volt lead. And then those 2 circles that are next to those copper pads, those are just the alignment holes. You just want to make sure you can see directly through there. Now down at the bottom, as you'll see here, we have that little tiny LED that is directly to the right of the original LED that is inside the Dualsense controller. Now flipping back over to the back of the Dualsense motherboard, you can see that all my tabs, they're essentially already all soldered in. And also to go along with the solder, I usually put some hot glue at the corners just to be safe, because you don't want all that pressure of that mod chip trying to bend out, relying just on that solder. So adding a little bit of hot glue is a pretty good idea. And now here are these main solder connections that you have to worry about on the back of this PlayStation 5 Dualsense motherboard. As you can see, we have L3 on the left and R3 is directly on the right. We just have to put a generous amount of solder on there, and then that's going to hold down this mod chip in place for you. Now this next part is going to be hooking up our main connections from our triggers. So that includes our L2, R2, L1, and R1 that we soldered those wires to earlier. Now we have to remember that L2 and R2, those are the top wires that we soldered to our triggers, and we just have to connect those wires directly up to our mod chip. So on that mod chip, it's actually labeled for you, so that makes it very convenient and easy for you guys to visualize and remember exactly where to hook this wire up to. And then that bottom wire that we soldered to the triggers, that one is L1 and R1. So I actually went ahead and tried to label everything exactly that I did here. So as you can see, L2 is at the top and L1 is on the bottom. And then on the mod chip itself, looking over to that left area, L1 is on the top and L2 is on the bottom. Now I suppose if you're not going to install any back buttons in your Dualsense controller, you can pretty much stop here. This is if you essentially just want a rapid fire controller. So if you want to go that extra step and install these back buttons on your Dualsense controller, you can continue this video from here and you'll see exactly how I did it with my 12mm tactical buttons. So the first thing that you have to notice is that these 12mm buttons, they're actually a little bit too big. So we do have to remove some plastic inside of the Dualsense controller. And now in the future, I'm actually going to show you guys how to install some paddles as well. Just not in this video. I'm currently waiting for them to come in the mail. So stay tuned for that if you're interested. So moving on to those couple of areas where we have to remove the plastic. As you can see here, I circled the 2 areas where we have to remove it. So all I used was a pair of pliers, and all you have to do is just grab the plastic parts on the corners of it and then just twist it, and then these plastic pieces just bend right off. And then as you can see on the other side, I went ahead and already did it, and this is exactly what yours should look like if you decide to attempt this. Now the next part that I noticed is that my 12mm buttons are actually being interfered by the area where the rumble packs are on the sides of the inner plastic shell of the controller. So we have to remove a little bit of material there too. Now I was a little bit concerned that if I removed this, that the rumbles would start to kind of shake. But once I hooked everything back up and I closed the controller up, I had no issues at all, so that you don't have to worry about that. So as you can see here, this is what that inner plastic shell looks like before. We have to remove this whole section. And then as you can see here, this is exactly what it should look like when you cut everything out of the way. And there you go. So I have my 12mm button installed right here. As you can see, nothing is in the way, and my controller closes up, and this plastic inner shell easily goes into the back shell of the controller. So that's exactly what you want. You want to keep test fitting that shell to make sure that everything works perfectly. Now, one tip that I can give you guys is that I actually sacrificed one of my 12mm buttons so I can help with the alignment of my holes, because I want it to be even on both sides, because if it's a little bit off, I just feel like it won't look that good. So I went ahead and I drilled a hole directly through the middle of my 12mm button, and that gave me the opportunity to be able to mount the button directly where I want it. And then I just took my drill and went directly through it from the inside of the controller, and then it came out the other side, and that was essentially the easiest way to align up my buttons. And then I also went ahead and did the same exact thing on the other side as well. As you notice, I found that these buttons kind of fall right into place at a slight angle, and once it does that, you'll know that the buttons are essentially locked right in, and you'll know you're pretty much good to go, and you can go ahead and glue that in. And finally, I went ahead and took my 3/8 Milwaukee drill bit, and I went directly through my pilot hole that I drilled through my sacrificed 12mm button. And once I did that, my buttons essentially just fell right into place, and I was able to finally glue them directly in. Now, when you glue them in, you just want to put a generous amount around the whole perimeter of the button, and then I'd put a very small thin layer of hot glue along the top of the button as well, just to be on the safe side, so when you're pushing up against it, it doesn't lift up, and then it's just going to make sure that it lasts a very long time for you. Now we can finally go ahead and solder our back buttons directly to our mod chip. Now I'm utilizing the left side of the mod chip. You can actually add 2 more buttons onto your controller if you wish. I'm just going to go ahead and only do 2 for the moment. So since I'm doing 2 buttons, all we have to do is just solder 4 wires directly to it. So I'm actually going to put up a quick picture for you guys so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So M1 and M2, that pretty much stands for macro 1 and macro 2. Those are the two buttons that we're going to be installing onto the controller. The only thing that you have to worry about is that you have to make sure that you bring the 2 wires from one of your buttons to the 2 soldering connections that are underneath M1, and then on your other button you have to bring those 2 wires and go to those 2 soldering connections that are underneath M2. So once you solder up those 4 wires, we can go ahead and connect up our back buttons. Now to do that, I'm just essentially tinning up my leads on the end of the wires, and then I'm wrapping them around the leads that are on the back buttons. And then same thing goes for the other side. I just have the 2 wires that are coming from macro 2, and then those 2 are going to that left button over there. So with that said, this controller is finally officially done. So we can go ahead and install our battery back. We can put all of our microphones back in, put that tray back in, and we can start closing up the controller. So with that said, this controller is finally finished. I have my rapid fire mod chip installed. I have the red LEDs installed on it, and I also hydro dipped this controller for the client as well. So I feel like he's going to be very excited to get this controller in hand, because wait till you see the next video. I'm going to be showing you guys exactly how to program your controller, how to program your back buttons, and also how to activate rapid fire on your controller too. And I will also be providing some gameplay video as well, because it's pretty funny how crazy that the rapid fire performs on semi-automatic rifles and also pistols too. And it's also especially funny with people's reactions too. So that video should be out in about 2 days. It's going to take me a little bit to edit it, so just stay tuned. Make sure you comment, like, and subscribe on this video. And we're actually almost at 20,000 subscribers, so pretty soon I'll be giving away that other controller that you guys have all been waiting for. And I'm actually also putting together a rapid fire rainbow LED PS5 controller. Now this one I'm going to be listing on my Etsy store, so the first person to purchase it is going to be very lucky, because that one's going to be a limited edition one. I'm not sure if I'll be making any more of those in the future. And with that said, have a nice day. Thanks.
I'm outside in an AMG, right outside, TT, 2-turn baby girl, you know me, still with the dogs that I grew beside, all the niggas round me, they die, gotta watch the time cause it's flying right by. I'm outside in an AMG, right outside, TT, 2-turn baby girl, you know me. All the niggas round me. just caught a shorty off a flight.